Good evening. Right now, Metro Police are desperately searching for the person or people responsible for killing a man and a woman. Breaking news now, a triple shooting leaves 2 dead.
Never expect for somebody to tell you your loved one was murdered.
This Labor Day will mark 42 years that have haunted the St. Cloud family.
30 years. 30 years this family has waited for answers.
A couple months go by, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you really start to struggle with the idea that the case might not get solved and that somebody might get away with murder.
It's very unfortunate that we have any cold cases at all, and certainly unfortunate that we have as many as we do. And that's why the Ryan's work and the work of Project Cold Case is so important.
Good evening. Thanks for joining me tonight. I know everybody is as excited as I am to welcome our guest this week, Kelly Siegler from You Know Her and Love Her from Cold Justice. She was also a prosecutor in the Harris County District Attorney's Office in Texas. Kelly, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, Ryan. I'm happy to be here.
It is so good to finally have you on. I know we've talked about this a few times over the last couple of years. And finally getting you on here to see our families, talk to our families. I'm really excited. That being said, I want to come right out of the gate because I know the most popular question is going to be, can you help with my loved one's case? District Attorney's Office. And that's for me, and that's for a lot of our followers and the families that we serve. And so let's just get that out of the way. There is a process for a case to be featured on Cold Justice. Kelly, as much as you would like to take every case, every family that emails you, it's not all in your court. There is a process. Can you give us a little rundown on that?
Yes. First of all, I would say to all of you out there that when you forward me your information about your cases, we read every comment and we go as far as we can to see if we can work the case. But I think the most important thing to remind everybody is, in order for us to do a credible job, we have to have access to the real file, to the true investigator's complete file, all the evidence, all the witness statements, all the police reports. And the only way to get that is for local law to want us to work the case with them. We can't just ride into town and take over a case and act like we know what we're doing. We have to have the file. So the first step is your detective that's working your case has to want us, and he has to be able to share his complete file with us. We also have to have the permission of the prosecutor in that jurisdiction who's handling that case. They have to want us too, because if they're upset that we're working the case, that's not going to do anybody any good. And obviously we want you to want us working your case. So those 3 steps, local law, the prosecutor, and the family, all those have to be in place before we can even start to work on a case. Yeah,
it's just always more complicated. And I know because you and I have a relationship and we talk, pretty regularly, that you want to do these cases. You've reached out to me and asked, hey, do you have any families? Do you have any law enforcement agencies? What do you have? But there's so many other steps involved, including the approval. I have families say, well, I have my case file. And what they usually have is like a copy of the report or the supplemental reports, but they don't have the evidence log. They don't have access to the evidence. So right. Even those cases where a family might have more information than another family, it's not the case file. And I think it's important that people remember you're working with law enforcement with the goal of a prosecution, a conviction.
Yes.
Not just a review of the case.
Right. It's not just talking about the case. It's making a case that's admissible in the courtroom under the rules of evidence, one day being the goal in a courtroom. And I think a lot of families also think if they hire a private investigator and they compile a report, they forward that to me and say, can you work on this? And that's always very helpful. And we definitely include that and go over that. But again, you have to have local law involved. And I think that everybody, please hear that. Get your detective or your sergeant or your cold case cop to want us to help him work the case. And that's our first step.
Yeah. And then there is also a process through the production company. They're going to filter through these cases and find cases that, let's be honest, that do better on television. right? I mean, their
Well,
job is to create ad revenue, and they're going to pick cases they feel like can be solved, right?
yes,
You
yes.
know,
And look at it like this, guys. I want to keep working cases on cold justice as long as we can. So in order to do that, we have to make cases and television shows that people want to watch. And Oxygen, who's graciously generous about everything, they have certain things that they like us to work on and do, and we try to make them happy because they're the ones paying for everything. So, those cases that we're never going to solve, or the serial killer cases it would take 9 months to work on, we can't work on those cases. It's mostly common sense when you think about the ones that we're never going to be able to work on. Those are the ones that we have to steer away from, to be honest.
yeah. So we'll probably have to revisit that. I know a lot of people are going to want your help. And part of this Facebook Live is to explain to them how they could potentially get your help, which is, of course, go to their detective and ask them to reach out to you and consider cold justice as an avenue to resolve their case. But I want to talk to you about some other stuff. I want to go back prior to cold justice. When you were a prosecutor, you had a reputation for taking on murder cases, death penalty cases, and being very successful. Were they mostly active cases? Were there cold cases involved in those as well?
As time went on, I worked on mostly cold cases. I think I tried my first murder case when I was about 27 or 28. And in the last 10 years at the office, I worked on nothing but cold cases. And I mean, this is Harris County. So Chicago, New York, LA, Harris County, you can see how busy we were with murder cases.
Yeah.
And I think because we worked in the trenches on real cases, all kinds, every day, we got real world experience. And a case came in your court and it was your case. You didn't get to turn it away. It was your case. You worked it. You figured it out. You took it to trial or you got a plea bargain. You met the family. Time after time after time again, I met the family members who had lost loved ones and dealt with people who had to go through this process of the criminal justice system. So, I might be on a TV show now, Ryan,
Yeah.
but this is not like I'm a TV girl that set out to do this. This comes because I worked real cases in real courtrooms with real judges screaming at me and real cops screaming at me to file their cases for 21 years, for a long time. And I think that that's what makes this all work, real experience.
Absolutely. And I want to talk to you about that because I think, that's something that until I got involved in working with both families and law enforcement, until my dad was murdered and I had to step into this world, I didn't understand and I didn't know. And it actually took a while before I was putting pieces together that you get into some shouting matches with detectives, not just you,
Yes.
actually prosecutors. Like you would think sometimes I've overheard some of these meetings where a detective will present a case to you, the prosecutor, and you will say, and I'm just using you in general, but you'll say, that's not enough. I need you to go
Yes.
follow up on X. And then they'll get mad at you and say, I have this, this, and this. Why do you want,
Absolutely.
and people don't realize, and then somehow y'all walk out of there and you're friends again.
Well, that's how I met Abby and Johnny Bonds and Alan Brown on the show. Abby and Alan would come in and yell at me, "Hey girl, you need to do this, you need to do that." And I would go, "No, you need to go this, you need to go do that." And then you come back to me. But this is one thing I want to say to family members and to cops out there. So you heard what Ryan just said about how the real dynamic works with prosecutors and cops, okay? I never realized, because they yelled at me all the time when I was a prosecutor and I yelled right back at them. I never realized until I started working on cold justice that there are cops out there, and this is to cops out there, who feel like somehow that it's your job when you have a case and you've been working it for a while, years on a cold case, and you think in your mind as a cop, I have enough evidence, that you think it's your job to run interference for your prosecutor and not let the family get to the prosecutor, that you have to be that voice on behalf of the prosecutor that says, well, it's just circumstantial. I hate those words. It's just circumstantial and we don't have enough yet. If you don't believe that as the cop, don't say it for your prosecutor.
Right.
That's their job to say there's not enough. You don't need to run interference. I don't think there was a day at the academy where a cop was told, this is the day we teach you to run interference for your prosecutor day. Nuh-uh. If you're the cop and you think you have enough evidence and you believe that with all your heart, tell your family the truth. Tell your family, I think we're there. I've run it down to my DA. They wish we had a confession, ha ha. They wish we had DNA, ha ha. They don't think there's enough. I don't know what else to do. And you know what you do as a family member? You pick up the damn phone and you schedule a meeting with your prosecutor and you see if your cop wants to come too and you go talk to your prosecutor. But I found too many times that it's the cops out there that believe it, but they're not telling the family that. And we're stuck in this stalemate for years, and nothing's happening. And I think that that's really tragic.
I would ask the detective friends I know, I would say, why do you cover for a prosecutor when you truly believe that this is a case that is prosecutable and winnable and that there's enough evidence there? And they always kind of just give me like this, well, we have to work with them day in and day out, and we have to be, and I understand that. And I know you want a good working relationship, one where you can go back and forth, but then, mutually respect each other. But you and I know that there are cases out there that there's no new evidence coming out. There's no magic, there's no technology that's going to come along and solve the case. You have what you have. It's been 30 years, 40 years since the murder happened. It's a great circumstantial case, but it doesn't have surveillance, DNA.
And it never will.
A nun that witnessed it, you know what I mean? Eyewitness, and it never will. None of those things are ever going to show up. And they still kind of, well, we're going to review it again. Mm-hmm. How many times have you heard a prosecutor, well, we're going to review it again. You've reviewed it 3 times. You've reviewed it,
And how many times, Ryan, have you heard family members tell you that, well, my detective tells me that the DA says, because again, they're talking to their detective, not their DA, which is incorrect. Right. But the DA says, we only get one shot.
Yeah.
And when we take it to trial, what if it's a hung jury or not guilty? Well, you know what? I've had family members tell me every single time, take your damn shot. Yeah. Take your shot. If you get a not guilty at trial, at least we get to hear our evidence played out in the courtroom. At least we know somebody's trying and caring and pushing the case forward. So take the shot. That's what family members say. And you would tell a prosecutor every day of the week, your job is to seek justice. And if justice is in your mind, you believe this is who committed this murder, then seek justice. If you get a not guilty and you get a goose egg on your win-loss record, nobody cares.
Right.
That family knows you're trying, so try and do your job.
And I do get the perspective of, say it's a 4-year-old case and there's a little bit of DNA and technology may come along one day that could give you a big boost in physical evidence. But when we're talking about cold cases and we're talking about 30-year-old cases, 40-year-old cases, and every bit of physical evidence has been tested, retested, or it doesn't exist, sometimes all you have is a circumstantial case and a jury.
Don't say that, Ryan.
Well,
what you'd love to have is a circumstantial evidence case.
Yeah. I always think that sometimes jurors are not given enough credit.
Absolutely.
Because and I know a lot of people will try to do whatever they can to get out of jury duty. And sometimes I try to remind them, like, hey, look, if you're ever wrongfully charged, you want competent people on that jury to see through, the case. So the same thing is true. Like, if you put people on that jury that have common sense, they're going to connect with circumstantial evidence way better than DNA evidence.
Yeah, right? Can I tell you a jury story?
Sure.
So whenever I was picking a jury on a cold case, I would start out to the panel of 62 people and say, okay, so guys, we're here on a cold case today. It's 15 years old. You heard the judge read the indictment. What I'm going to tell you right now is we don't have the gun. We don't have a fingerprint. We don't have a confession. We don't have DNA. We don't have ballistics. We don't have any of that. What are y'all thinking? And somebody out there will go, well, it sounds like you got a bad case, lady. And I'll think to myself, okay, got his number. And somebody out there will say, well, you must have something or we wouldn't be here. And I want to hear what it is. And those are the jurors that make it on the jury because they get it. We wouldn't be sitting here in the courtroom unless you had a whole bunch of little bitty pieces of circumstantial evidence to get us here today. And jurors have common sense. Look at all the verdicts we've had lately. Jurors get the verdicts right 99% of the time. So give them the chance to hear the evidence. Let the family sit in the courtroom and watch you busting your tail trying to prove their case to a jury and watch it play out. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. Another question I have for you, talking about prosecutors, state attorneys, district attorneys are elected. They change, there's new ones that come in. And I've always wondered, does a new incoming district attorney or state attorney go back through the old cases that were declined, prosecution declined? That's what a lot of law enforcement agencies, they will basically, some agencies will clear a case based on prosecution declined.
Yeah.
And, somebody else could come in and have a very different opinion on whether that's a prosecutable case and whether that circumstantial case, is worth taking to a jury.
I've learned
Well, I was just going to ask. Sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
I think one of the biggest factors in cold cases moving forward is elections. Whether the election is because a new sheriff is elected or a new prosecutor or DA is elected. It's kind of sad, really, that that's a factor in cases moving forward. I want to say moving forward, not be in decline, but yeah. So if you get a new DA and they have a new let's go attitude and they're very enthusiastic and they want to look at cold cases all over again, heck yeah, that's a great opportunity to revisit old cases.
Yeah. I think the important thing I hope that, our viewers and our families that are taking note of is if you have not had a meeting with the prosecutor assigned to your case, that should be your next step. Your next phone call is to call that office, particularly if you've had a meeting with the detective and the detective has told you that they know who did it, but not enough evidence to prosecute, or they're told there's not enough evidence to prosecute, then you deserve a sit down. And I know here, the state attorney in our judicial circuit, Melissa Nelson, she sends out letters to families that says, if you ever want to sit down, contact my office at this number and we will sit down and talk to you about the case.
Wow.
So it's there's not a lot of them that do that.
No, I've never heard of that. That's your elected state's attorney?
Our elected state's attorney,
Good
Melissa
for her.
Nelson. She was the one on our intro video at the
Good
very
for
end,
her.
talking about cold cases. So yeah, she recognized an issue there, and she has tried to address it. She started a cold case initiative within her office. And they work diligently to meet with families, to encourage law enforcement to come meet with them so that they can figure out what is needed on a case that, hasn't gone to trial yet. So yeah, they're out there, but I think, we see you on TV, and I think when you're outside of this world, as far as knowing the ins and outs of the judicial process and the criminal justice process, you don't know what a prosecutor does. Maybe people forget, that you were fighting in the courtroom long before you were ever on television. And so what you needed to take a case forward. And that's kind of why your assistance in cold justice, why it has to go with law enforcement. Because, I know a lot of the cases that cold justice that do make it to cold justice are cases where it's prosecutorial issues. It's not typically a whodunit. Maybe you have a few people, that are suspects and you haven't narrowed it down. But it's typically not one of those shows that is just going to test evidence and try to find somebody. You're going to sit down and you're going to help these detectives hone their presentation skills, for lack of a better term, right? Because the goal is they're going to get in front of a prosecutor and they're going to pitch hopefully the best case that prosecutor's ever heard, and they're going to be excited to indict and take him to trial.
And what we try to do on the show, because this is what I did on my real cases, is when a witness or forensically, but mostly witnesses, every single little piece of the story of the case that they add, we try to put it all together in a summary form, a probable cause statement. Sometimes we call it wrapping up the present and putting a bow on top. As pretty and tight and clean and concise and accurate under the rules of evidence as their memories exist in 2022. That's what we do by the time we leave a town. And that's our hope, is that when we drive away, the prosecutor's like, they left me a good case and I'm ready to move forward. I think the sad thing that I've learned going all across the country is, and I think that unfortunately a lot of people that know about Project Cold Case, and you, Ryan, and you yourself, is that what makes me really sad is that if you have a loved one murdered in, Gillespie County, Texas, or Duval County, Florida, or Cook County, Chicago, the rules are different. The rules of evidence, the law, the admissibility, the burden of proof of beyond a reasonable doubt is exactly the same everywhere in this country. So how come, depending on where you're murdered and who the sheriff is or who your prosecutor is such a determinative factor in whether or not you get justice? That makes me want to throw up. Yeah. And I never knew that it was such the truth, that that's what happens in the United States of America, where you're murdered is way too important of a factor in whether you get justice, and that is wrong.
Yeah. So I hadn't really ever thought of it that way, but you bring something to light that for these families.
It's awful.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that are taken out of our control when our loved one is murdered, right? So we can't control the investigation, how effective the detective is, how ambitious the prosecutor is. We can't control what evidence is left at a scene, if the technology is good enough to actually test it. But you bring on a whole new thing. We have really no control over whether it happens in a place where
nothing.
Yeah, where people are fighting for it.
Your ride through the criminal justice system is long and heartbreaking and painful, and you have no control. I know one of the cases that I handled was the case of Jennifer Ertman and Elizabeth Pena. And Elizabeth's parents were Adolph and Melissa, and Jennifer's parents were Randy and Sandra. And their daughters were coming home one night and they missed their curfew, so they took a shortcut across some railroad tracks and ended up in the middle of a gang initiation, and they were gang raped and brutally, horribly murdered. It was a huge case here in Houston. There were 6 defendants, 1 juvenile, and 5 went to trial. They all got death at one point. So one day we were sitting in the courtroom after we picked the jury, and Randy was in the courtroom with me that day. We were actually trying 3 trials concurrently in our courthouse. So those parents had to go through opening statement, direct. That's what they had to go through for 3 weeks. So Randy was sitting there one day and he goes, Kelly, I get here early every morning and I sit in my car and I see him bring, this was my defendant, across the street on the chain from the jail. I could take him out, I could bring my deer rifle and I could take him out. Do you know how hard it is for me not to take him out? And Randy's passed away, may he rest in peace. And I said, you know what, Randy, how about you let this trial play out and let's see how we all do. Let's see if we can get justice for you. And if we don't, we'll talk about your plan. And I remember that day thinking as a parent, what he wanted to do, that's what I would want to do, But he trusted us. He trusted all of us prosecutors, 5 defendants times 2, 10 prosecutors that had their cases. They trusted us. They relied on us. Up until today, they could call us to walk them through all that. And that's what the prosecutor's supposed to do. They're supposed to be helping you and guiding you and advising you and counseling you and leading you through this horrible nightmare that you never asked to be in the middle of. They're not supposed to be saying, oh, I can't take their call. Or detective, don't you tell them to call me. That's horrible for a prosecutor to be doing that, right?
Absolutely. Well, and so I want to ask you this. if we can get these families at a seat at the table with the prosecutor, what are some of the questions you think they should ask? Like, what's the important stuff? Because, we've had this problem before where we encourage families to schedule an appointment or make a phone call, and then they're kind of caught off guard. They're like, I didn't really know what to ask.
No.
So we always tell people, let's write them all down. Let's come up with some questions.
Well,
what should they ask?
I would say, first of all, this is another misconception, because I've thought about this. If one of my babies got murdered, this is how I think I would want to be treated. If you get that meeting with your prosecutor, don't go in there with questions. You go in there to fight. You go in there to fight to get charges filed. But the only way you can do that is to truly know the facts of the case.
Right.
So this whole thing out there about, oh, it's an open investigation, so we don't share the details. Bullshit. If that's my baby that's murdered, I want to know what the evidence is. I want to know what people say. I want to know what the testing says. I want to know what's going on. So if I'm going to be educated and informed enough to go in there to my DA meeting and see why they're not filing charges, I got to know what the evidence is to make that argument, right?
Sure.
So don't set a meeting to go in there and say, what do you have? You should by now know what there is. Your detective should be telling you better what they have, or bring that detective to the meeting with you to make a conversation happen about why aren't we moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah.
The answer that you gave earlier about what DNA is evolving, let's retest stuff. That might be a good reason to wait. Or, one I love is, that marriage is really on the rocks. Let's let a divorce happen and see if something new comes out of that relationship. That's a good reason to wait and see what happens. There are reasons to wait. I'm not saying you can never wait, but just to sit back and be told there's not enough. Well, why isn't there enough? Tell me why there's not enough. Is a jury really going to believe there's not enough when you put all that out there? Don't just take the easy answer and walk out of that room and go away forever and leave them alone. Don't do it.
I love your passion and your fire, Kelly. And I know our families do too, because this is what they're saying. Unfortunately, they don't feel like anybody's listening to them, and they don't feel like anybody understands why they feel that way, but they do. They want to know why. They want to know the details, and they're always told, well, we have to keep some stuff close to the vest so that it doesn't get out. The whole way investigations works, I wish I could alter, and I do get it, but there is some truth and reality in some of the things that detectives are worried about. And I know you and I have had this conversation off air, together, like random podcasts and, and like families are sometimes so desperate to get information out there and to share their loved one's story that they may go on a podcast that is, hopefully not listened to by anybody, but it's not, there's no law enforcement experience. There's no prosecutorial experience. There's no victim experience. It's just somebody that wants to sensationalize someone else's grief and trauma to try to get listens, on their podcast. And so we had the other side of that sword where we're trying to, slow our families down and say, don't just take any opportunity, vet every opportunity when it's something like that in the media. Because we've had some families go on podcasts and then come back and be like, I said something I wish I didn't, or I shared something in the heat of the moment that doesn't make my loved one look good, or it doesn't make law enforcement look good, or it doesn't, it's something that I really didn't mean to happen. And now I can't get them to pull it or edit it, And so I think what I'm trying to say here to our families is there are avenues to express your frustration and to demand justice. And then there are avenues that really could jeopardize a prosecution or jeopardize, that justice. So let's focus on our detectives and our prosecutors. And, and if they will not support you, then let's talk about, what you can do publicly maybe. And we've had that conversation because we do have some families in common that we've both worked with in the past that have not had, the success of some of the other cases, and it's hurt them, and and you know this, I don't want to get into details and say names, but you know what I'm talking about. There is a point where you don't have anything to do except maybe go public,
Right.
and because you've tried everything else, and I don't ever feel like there's no hope, and I never feel like there's nothing else you can do. But there's a family that we both know that has done so much and had so much help from people like you and people like me in Project Cold Case, and it's the closest I've ever come to a case where I've thought, holy cow, like what can we possibly do next? What is that next step?
I know the case you're talking about, obviously, and I can say that I have way too many cases that I'm familiar with family members in that same situation where I don't know what's going to happen to shake the world, to make things move forward on their cases. It's going to take a lot. And I really believe, Ryan, that there comes a day where I have to say, and you might need to say, look, for your own mental health, for your own sanity and happiness for the rest of your life, to keep your family cohesive and together, you might have to let it go. You might not get justice on this earth. It's going to come another time, another day with God. We all know that. But for your own life, you might have to let it go. I've had that conversation, and it's a horrible conversation to have, but that's real, right? You have to be
Yeah.
real.
I mean, and this family somebody has some health issues. Multiple people have health issues, and they have had to step back a little bit, and I think they needed to step back for their own health. We have other families that sometimes have to take that step back. It doesn't mean you don't love your loved one and that you don't demand justice and want justice, but if you deteriorate, and if your health deteriorates, and if you leave, who's going to be fighting for your loved one? If you're not on this earth, who's going to fight for them? So,
and also, your loved one who's gone and murdered, they would also want you to have your life and be happy. You have to look at it from their point of view too. Does the person who's gone really want you to the rest of your life just be devastated because all you're doing is being consumed with trying to get a case filed? That's why sometimes you have to let it go.
Yeah. And so let's talk about, some positive stuff. Let's talk about those stories, where something that sticks out to you, where you met a family and you were able to provide them either answers. I don't use the word closure because I don't know that exists. Yeah. And I thank you for not using it too. I think we put an unrealistic expectation and a burden on our families when all they hear is that they're going to get closure. They need closure. They have to have closure.
Right.
And then an arrest happens and a conviction happens, and their loved one's still gone, and they have to celebrate every holiday without them. And that pain is still there, and that hole in their heart is still there. And so we don't want to put that burden on a family. If a family member feels like they got closure and they want to say that, good for them. I just don't like our families feeling like there is something at the end of this journey that is going to complete them again when they've been, traumatized like this.
You will notice on Cold Justice, you will never hear me or let our show promo the word closure, because to me, if I hear a cop or a prosecutor say closure, it's kind of like saying blood splatter instead of spatter. That tells me you're playing JV ball because you don't know what you're doing. And I was speaking to a Parents of Murder Victim seminar a long time ago, and I got through talking, and one of the family members came up to me at the end and said, I want to thank you for not using the word closure. And that was the first time it dawned on me, because I haven't been a family member of a murder victim, just a prosecutor. And it's the first time it dawned on me, oh my God, how what's the word? Selfish, narcissistic, whatever you want to think of, to use the word closure for somebody else when I have no idea what they're living and dealing with. Like you just said, every birthday, every day, every coffee cup memory that they have. If you use closure and you're in law enforcement, you might want to check that word, because the only thing we can provide is justice. And that's why the show is called Cold Justice, because in a courtroom, under the rules, and the law and what's admissible, we can deal with that. But that's all we can deal with. Closure is a shrink word, and I don't believe in it either.
Yeah. So I know we've had some questions. I wanted to get to some, but a lot of people are asking specifics about their case. And we kind of mentioned that at the beginning, that we can't really get into specifics on cases. And Kelly, doesn't have all the control to get your loved one's case on the show. You can submit it, and they'll look at it and they'll reach out to the detective. But it's got to come from the detective and the prosecutor. Like, both have to be on board for her to be able to help. But there were some other questions that I think you might be able to answer, or at least give some advice on. Rebecca is one of our local survivors, and her son, who you see in that picture there, was murdered. My detective retired. I can't get anyone to return my calls about who is assigned now. They say no one is assigned. And that's one of the things that we encourage families to do is if you haven't talked to them in a long time, call and ask, is Detective so-and-so still there? Because detectives turnover in law enforcement is crazy. They promote, they retire, they transfer, they get fired, they quit. There's so much turnover.
Especially now.
Yeah, especially now. So we always encourage them, call and ask, well, who's assigned to it? And if no one's assigned, where do you go from there? We always say, ask if it can be sent down to the cold case unit, ask if they can review it. But for Rebecca, because I know Rebecca's job sometimes doesn't allow her to watch the whole thing. So I don't know if she heard us talk about this earlier. I don't know if she's made an appointment with the prosecutor. And if there's not a detective assigned, then I think that's another good step, is another reason to reach out to the prosecutor's office and ask for a meeting with them.
And if you don't know who your cop is, what you do is you call your police department or your sheriff's department. When the lady answers the phone, you say, can I please speak to the man in charge of working murder cases? And if they don't have a guy that just does that, you say, can I please speak to the cop in charge of investigations? And you get that cop, and then you ask him, who's in charge of murder cases? And then when you get him, you say, because a lot of them don't have this, do you have someone dedicated to simply cold cases? And then you get that guy. And then if you're lucky, they might have divided them up. But you can start with investigations and then murders and then cold cases. And Ryan, the other thing I would say is that, a lot of sheriff's departments and police departments, they have this glut of cold cases. And they feel like, we want to do something with cold cases, but I don't know what to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a guy who's retired back in to work on cold cases on Tuesdays and Thursdays or 20 hours a week. That doesn't work. Doesn't work. You have to have a cop assigned to do nothing but work on cold cases 40 hours a week, because it's a full-time job. You can't make it a part-time job and expect that a whole lot's going to get done. It's a full-time job. And I think that's why our show works, because we're making a cop work on just our case nonstop every single day, the whole time we're there. And that's why we get results.
And I think, some agencies have a dedicated cold case unit, but they also have the responsibility of officer-involved shootings, in custody deaths. They're the child abduction response team. And when naturally, cold cases are a lower priority in an agency. That's why so few of them have dedicated cold case units, right? But when you make them a dedicated unit, and then you tell them that you work cold cases unless an officer is involved in a shooting, well, an officer-involved shooting is the highest priority investigation in any agency, right? An in-custody death is a pretty important, responsibility. A child abduction is a pretty important. So you've made them a, cold case, but they have these huge other responsibilities. And what can they do if they're working on officer-involved shootings? That takes them away from anything that they're doing in cold cases. So it's a similar thing, that even if you do have a unit, if you don't let them truly be dedicated to cold cases, you're doing an injustice. Heck,
we're not even just talking officer-involved shootings. Most of the places across the country, they're also working burglaries and auto thefts and dope cases. So I get that they're swamped.
Major
and
crimes.
Family members know that. They know that they have fresh cases to work on, but you just have to keep, be that annoying victim that when your detective sees your number, they're like, oh, but you know what? Don't stop
Yeah.
calling. Don't stop
Yeah,
calling.
absolutely. Let me, there was a couple other, there's a couple other comments here that I saw that were really good. They started rolling in. There was one that was about how it got started. Where did it go? Let's see. Oh, here you go. From Shannon. She asked, how did cold justice come to fruition? Did Kelly come up with the idea for the show, or was it pitched to her? And what were her initial thoughts on doing the show?
Okay, well, Ryan knows this story. So the story is I was at the DA's office in Harris County for 21 years. And then I decided to run for DA in 2008. Well, I lost. I wasn't a very good politician. So I lost in a runoff in the primary. And then I found myself unemployed. It was a shock because I had the best job in the whole world. And then I'm unemployed. And I thought, what the heck am I going to do with the rest of my life? Because I was 46 at that time. So I knew that I was good at working on cold cases, and I knew because I worked with people all over Texas that there are a lot of them out there that are this close to being solved if you could just focus your time and effort on them and try. So I came up with the idea, and I was lucky enough to know a lady who hooked me up with Dick Wolf. One night on a phone call on a Friday night, I got to talk to Dick Wolf on the phone, and I told him what I'm telling y'all right now. There are cases everywhere. I can solve them. We can work them. They're great stories. Don't you think it'd be a great TV show? And he said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And that's how it all started. It's like a miracle that that's how it worked, but that's really and truly what happened.
I love that story too. So this one too, the Mildred said, how do you actually get a detectives to help you on the show? So
and Mildred, I know Mildred, I think she means like my partner.
yeah.
So, lots of cops want to work on the show. Everywhere I go, there are a lot of detectives out there that want to work on the show. The problem is most of them have full-time jobs. I want to think that when we come to work on a case, the local detectives know that we are throwing our best efforts and the very best that we have at that case, because if we drive out of town and the case isn't about to be filed, everybody involved knows that that's probably the last time that case is going to get worked on ever, or for sure for a long time. So, I want to bring detectives that have real world experience from the big cities, Milwaukee, where Spangola's from,
Yeah.
Houston, where Abby's from, the big cities where all the murders really happen. That's where you get the experience. Look at where I'm from, Harris County. I remember in the day, there were 600 murders that happened a month in Harris County back then. We had
my
HPD and Harris County and 72 other law enforcement agencies. How much busier can you be to learn how to be good at working murder cases? So
Yeah.
those are the people that really, really, really know what they're doing, and those are good detectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Lee asked this, if there is no cold case unit, what do we as family members do? And there's a lot of reach out to your resources. I don't mean this as the family. I mean this is law enforcement. If an agency is so small, they don't even have a cold case unit, or
Most don't, Ryan.
Yeah.
Most don't on cold justice. So this is what I would tell you. You call your PD or your sheriff's department. You ask for the man in charge of investigations. Get the boss. And then you ask the boss, you have an unsolved murder. They might not even know they have it.
Yeah.
I want somebody to work on my family's murder case. And guys, let's keep it real here. There are some cold cases out there that are never going to be solved. If your case is 40 years old and all the witnesses have passed away, it can't be solved. And if your case is so heavily involved in drug activity that all the witnesses are drug users and abusers, and there's nobody credible to testify in the courtroom, it can't be solved. Okay? So you need to be realistic about this. We have to allocate our resources the best way possible. But you ask for the detective in charge of investigations, you tell them about your case, and you ask him, if he can assign someone, maybe even him, to please read your case file and get back with you on what they think can be done. And that's how you start.
Yeah, that's a great Great answer, because there are so many agencies that don't have a cold case unit. And I always meet these detectives that, they're like, well, I'm the cold case guy. Oh, officially? No. I'm the major crimes, the CID, but
Always.
I just like cold case. I'm the only guy in the office that will take on more work, like,
True. That's true.
and they always say, like, I just like them. So every now and then I'll go grab one, and I'll look through it and see what I can do.
And that's better than nothing. But, once you're that detective that opens the case, once you open it and you start on it, if you don't really, really, really take a hard run at it, when you shut it back up and put it back up on the shelf, nobody else in that department is going to pick it up behind you.
Yeah.
So if you're going to open one, then mean it, is what I would say to cops out there. Mean it.
Yeah, absolutely. Shane wanted to know how did you connect with Steve? I assume that's Spingola up in
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
Well, I didn't even know until I met Steve. Milwaukee, hell, that's a serious city for murder cases. If there's a murder out there, whatever kind it is, if it's an arson murder, if it's a cop got shot, if it's a drug murder, if it's a deer rifle murder, if it's a gang murder, every kind of murder there is, Steve has seen it because he comes from Milwaukee and he was there for his whole career. He worked murders his whole career, just like Abby did. They didn't just work murder for homicide for 3 years or so. They worked it their whole career. So that's the kind of cop that's seen everything, kind of like I have.
Yeah. He's an interesting character. We've never met and talked, but I've had some conversations, like, on social media with him. I sent you a message the other day where he had. I guess he's doing some trainings now, and he had hit us up to say he was available for some trainings and stuff like that. So it's always good to have somebody that has the experience, like you said, of the gang related, the
everything.
Just every domestic violence. The catch the suspect at the scene, with smoking gun, and then the whodunits, and and it's hard to do that when you're only have 3 murders a year in your County,
Right.
So,
If your whole county and you have 5 people assigned to homicide, well, then you're each catching 6 a year. That's experience, but that's not what Houston and LA and Chicago and Milwaukee see. They see way more.
Yeah. Way too many.
Way too many.
I think I was trying to hit at this earlier, but I wanted to hear like some, and you mentioned one, but like some cases that have stuck out with you, just some families. Are you still in touch with some families? I know you're still in touch with some detectives that you've worked with on Cold Justice, because I've called you before and you've said, hey, I was just talking to Sergeant so-and-so at such and such sheriff's office, but do families still reach out to you that you worked with in the past? Yeah.
I mean, think about that horrible relationship that we have as your prosecutor. You never got to get a prosecutor on your case. But if you meet your prosecutor, and I mean, on mine, I remember the first time I met Ron Wright in the Susan Wright trial. He sat down in my office with his wife, Kay, and they looked at me and they said, well, Kelly, Susan's going to get life in prison, right? And I went, no, Ron, there's no way 12 jurors are going to unanimously decide to send this pretty blonde lady who's going to claim your son abused her, unanimously agree on a life sentence. That's never going to happen. And then I had to tell him, and by the way, she's going to get out on bond, because bond means that you're going to show up in court. It's not punishment for the fact that she stabbed Jeffrey 193 times. It just means she's going to show up in court. And they were crying, and I was crying, and that's the first meeting we ever had. And then we went through the whole, maybe she'll plead, maybe she won't. We went through the trial, we prepared for testimony, all that. And that wasn't even a death penalty case. Imagine after the conviction until somebody gets given the death penalty, the years that go by with that when you keep up with the family. So that relationship is like truly built in blood and built in pain, and it never goes away. And that's what a prosecutor is supposed to be for all of you.
Yeah. Tell me about that feeling when you sit down with a family and you're able to tell them that you are, whether it was on Cold Justice or even when you were prosecuting, that you are charging somebody and that they're going to get their day in court. That person is going to be held accountable. What's it like to sit down with a family that, some of these families gave up ever seeing justice. They never thought that day would come. I've seen the episodes on Cold Justice where you get to go in there, and make an arrest, and they're going to make an arrest. What does that feel like for you?
Well, it was a lot easier in my old job, because in my old job, I had complete control. It was my case, if I decided to charge it, it was my responsibility and my burden. And I would tell the families, always, always completely honest. Look, this part's going to be hard. This part's going to be easy. This part's going to be difficult. But it was my responsibility, and I was in charge of it. The difference on Cold Justice is we work the cases as if they're really ours, because that would be pretty lousy of us to pretend to work the case. We work the case as if it's going to be my case. But the ultimate decision is always the prosecutor's, as it should be. So as hard as you work and as much as you think you have and as strong as you think the case is, you don't get to make that final decision. And so telling the family that when it's good news is wonderful, but when it's not there yet, even when I think it might be, that's good too. But when I know it's never going to get there, it's awful.
Yeah.
Because I know that their hopes are up again, even though I told them when I met them the first day, don't get your hopes up. We can't promise anything. It doesn't matter how many times I say it, their hopes are up, and then I let them down. Let them down, and I know that, and they know that, and it's not a good day.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into a question that Clint, that works at our office, he sent me. How do you manage keeping expectations realistic? And I think being honest, but some of that's out of your control. As long as you're honest and you communicate at the very beginning, don't get your hopes up. We've got a long way to go. Nothing's guaranteed. But being honest with the family, I think sometimes there's this fear with law enforcement that we have to coddle these survivors because we don't want them to be sad. Guess what? They're sad. Guess what? Yeah. Nothing you say is going to be as bad as the day somebody knocked on their door and told them their loved one was murdered. They've already gone through that. So they can handle whatever it is you have to say, as long as you're being honest and truthful with them. And I think we struggle with that too with our families, trying to manage expectations. Getting a show on Cold Justice, if you selected, a case of a family I know, that doesn't guarantee a prosecution. It doesn't guarantee that case is going to get charged. It doesn't guarantee a conviction if it does lead, to an arrest. So there's always these expectations that we're reminding families, we want our loved ones to be on TV. We assign a value that if our loved one makes it onto TV, then somebody thinks they're important enough, right, to get a look like that. But that doesn't mean that the families that don't make it onto the show aren't as important and the victims aren't as important. But there is this, coddling of these families. Well, I don't want to, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to remind them of their loved one. They don't think about their loved one every single day. You
said it perfectly. I think you said it perfectly. And I think that I try to think, if it were me, if I were in your shoes, because you've been through this, and all of the people listening to us today, so many have been through this. I try to think, if I were you, and thank God I'm not, but if I were you, I would want whoever's dealing with my case to always be straight with me. Like you said, I need to hear it. Give me the real lowdown on this witness's credibility, or why the evidence got lost, or the DNA is not there, because tell me the real deal. I can take it. Like you said, after all you've been through, you can take it. And let's get it over with. You're going to find out sooner or later anyway. So let's just be straight the whole way and get through this together the best way that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly, we have already gone 55 minutes. I wanted to throw something up here that just kind of encompasses a lot of the comments that were coming in, the appreciation of the great information that we're sharing, the back and forth, the communication. I'm not a media person. I don't interview for a living. I have these lives with people that I know. So you and I have known each other for a couple of years now. We've been to dinner together. We have these conversations. I know based on our conversations in real life and on the telephone that we can sit here and provide value to the people that took the time, to watch today. And I think from what I'm seeing, there's a lot of people saying, thank you for that and for sharing the information. And I think that for those people that are saying that, it is because Kelly and I have had these conversations in private, a lot of them, and I know her passion and she knows my passion. And obviously, when we get together, we both get a little fired up.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. These families, want to know that people care. And
They want the truth.
And they want the truth. And they want to know that there are people out there in your position that are fighting for them. And the position of the cold case sergeant that we had on last week, he's fighting for them. I know that you still talk to some of these investigators because they bust their tail on these investigations. By the time you sit down there with them and you guys go through everything, the effort that they've put in. And
they've been fighting the fight for a while. Yeah.
And they don't always talk about that. They don't always share that publicly. They don't care about being, on the media press conferences and those kinds of things. So it really is, nothing hurts me more than when a family says they're not investigating my case. And then I talk to the detective and I find out that they have 10 bankers boxes full of, of reports and of stuff, but they've never sat down with the family and just said, we have tried, this is where we are. This is what we've done. Look at all of this. Like, please don't feel like we didn't try.
And they should do that. What you said,
that.
They should sit down and lay it out for them so the family knows, the motto for Project Cold Case, it's all about hope. And a family can only hope when they know someone's trying. And the detectives out there, we know you're trying. Tell the family how much you're trying.
Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
Everybody's got the same goal here.
Yeah, I know we got to get off here for a second, but Sheila asked this in the last second. I thought, any advice for someone studying criminal justice? I thought that was a very good question to ask. Not everybody has the opportunity to ask Kelly Siegler, a question like that.
I would say that it's the best job in the whole world, whether you want to be a probation officer or a detective or a sexual assault counselor or a prosecutor. The criminal justice system, there's never going to be a lack of work and there's never going to be a lack of helping people, and it's the best job in the whole world. So good for you and keep it up. And I hope a lot more y'all step into that field.
Yeah, good deal. All right, Kelly, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for giving up an hour of your evening and, answering these questions and making these families feel important, because that's one of the things we strive for. They are important and we want them to feel important. And you taking the time to answer their questions and help them, it means the world to me that you would do this as a favor to me, and obviously means a lot to the family. So thank you, Kelly. Good luck with Cold Justice. Anything you can share about Cold Justice? What's going on right now?
Well, we're looking for cases for next season right now. I'm home studying cases. So remembering everything you learned tonight, if you have any cases, send them our way. We're fired up and getting ready to go. And Ryan, thank you for all you do, because you're running an organization that's hugely important and a very difficult thing to do. And keep it up, man. It's a hard job.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I hope to see you in person soon.
Yes.
And until then, though, we'll just keep in touch. And maybe have you on again next year or something.
Okay.
If there's ever a case that we cross where we have a success, I'd love to have you on and talk about that too. So
Great idea. All right, Ryan. Thank y'all.
bye, Kelly. Thanks for everything.
Bye.